I'm really excited about this video because it's a chance for me to right some wrongs from your previous science teacher. You've probably been told about ATP before because ATP is the main product of cellular respiration, and that's a big part of biology. To make things simple for younger biologists, a lot of teachers say that ATP is energy. Well, now that we're a little more sophisticated with our biology knowledge, we're going to learn why that's just plain silly. This video is going to help accomplish these course goals. Pause the video and check them out. Let's start out by seeing the biochemical structure of ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. ATP is a modified version of our familiar nucleotide. Remember, a nucleotide has three parts: a nitrogenous base, a sugar, and a phosphate. How ATP is different is that ATP is the nucleotide plus two additional phosphates. The additional phosphates are attached by covalent bonds, and the biochemical nature of phosphates makes these high-energy covalent bonds. The reason these bonds are high energy is all in the biochemistry. Three of our biochemistry rules tell us a lot about ATP. Number 1, nature loves stability. Number 2, phosphates are negative. And number 3, like charges repel. Look at that beautiful biochemical structure of ATP. Think about how much energy was needed to get those covalent bonds to form between those phosphate molecules. Having all of those negative charges of phosphates together creates a lot of instability and a lot of high energy bonds. And when those bonds are broken, a fair amount of that energy is released. Think about ATP like a compressed spring or a mousetrap. It takes energy to load it. And once it's loaded, it's kind of like tense and ready to release that energy at the right time. So hopefully you can see why it's incorrect to say ATP is energy. A better way to talk about ATP is to say that ATP is a chemical that stores energy. ATP's origin story has a lot to do with the metabolism of our food. Breakdown of our food involves exergonic reactions that release energy. The energy released is used to drive the endergonic synthesis of ATP. Another way to think about this is that the energy in our food is used to make ATP, and a lot of the energy from the food is stored in those high energy covalent bonds between phosphates. But here's the deal. ATP isn't the final resting place of energy. ATP is just a temporary holder of energy. The energy stored in ATP is used to do so many different cell processes. I like the analogy of ATP as a currency. It's kind of a middleman that holds value, but just temporarily. Think about it. You go to work, and whatever you do at work has value. Your employer pays you money, and then that money hopefully is worth the value of your work, and then you use the money to go buy other things that you value for different amounts. Can you imagine how awkward it would be to work directly for the stuff you buy? Would I have to teach a biology lesson about ATP to buy a gallon of milk at the store? Hopefully not a whole lesson. Anyway, ATP just holds energy from the food that we eat. So we do all that work to get food and energy. ATP holds that energy temporarily, and that energy is used to do or kind of buy cell processes. Let me explain a little more. So what are we paying for with this ATP currency? In our class, I want you to think about ATP as being used for three different jobs: chemical work, mechanical work, and transport work. We've actually seen two of these in action already. With chemical work, the energy released from ATP hydrolysis can be used to power anabolic reactions. And this is called coupling, where energy released from an exergonic reaction is used to make an endergonic reaction go. You can see in this example there's a phosphorylated molecule, and that molecule loses its phosphate in the process of an anabolic reaction. In other words, ATP was kind of used to charge up this purple reactant here. We've also seen how ATP is used for transport work. We saw this in action with the sodium-potassium pump. ATP is the phosphate donor of this phosphate. Phosphates added to the protein pump allow the protein pump to change shape, from this shape open towards the cytoplasm to this shape open towards the extracellular space. What we haven't seen is ATP involvement in mechanical work. Check out this model of a muscle. The protein in red is a muscle contractile protein called myosin, and this blue protein down here is called actin. Muscle contraction works when myosin grabs onto actin and pulls against the actin. You can see the shape change of myosin from this shape to this shape after the pulling. The role of ATP in this process is that myosin is phosphorylated, changing the shape of myosin. This shape change in myosin is called the power stroke, and many successive power strokes lead to the process of muscle contraction. So biology teachers have confused you by calling ATP energy, but us same biology teachers probably told you that glucose is energy too. This can be so confusing, so now it's time to put these myths to bed. Neither glucose nor ATP are energy. Both compounds, however, store energy in their chemical bonds. Living things have adapted to release the energy from these bonds when work needs to be done. In fact, the definition for energy is the ability to do work. So, what's the difference between energy that's in the bonds of glucose and energy that's in the bonds of ATP? Well, really nothing. It's just how much energy is stored in each compound. You can see in the diagram that glucose releases about 2,870 kilojoules of energy when it's broken down. ATP, on the other hand, releases about 30 kilojoules of energy when it's broken down. So that makes glucose kind of like a $100 bill and ATP like a $1 bill. Why is this handy? Well, think about your cell like a dollar store. A lot of the processes that your cells need to do cost about $1. So it's convenient to have a lot of singles around. Another thing is that a lot of times when molecules are broken down for energy, they're not partially broken down and saved for later. So breaking down glucose to do cell jobs would be like bringing a $100 bill into a dollar store, buying one thing and not being able to get any change. In other words, with ATP, you get more bang for your buck. And how are these bucks spent? How is the energy value of ATP released? Simple, just break this high energy bond. The bond that's broken most frequently is this one between the second and third phosphate. When ATP is hydrolyzed, the energy released by this exergonic reaction can be coupled to drive other chemical reactions. Keep in mind that when ATP is hydrolyzed, the products are ADP plus a free phosphate. Free phosphate is often abbreviated as P subscript I. ATP, however, isn't just a source of energy. ATP also has valuable phosphates. So ATP hydrolysis produces energy and phosphates. Let's talk about how those are used. The energy of ATP hydrolysis is used to drive other chemical reactions. The energy of ATP can be used to overcome the activation of another reaction. For example, this reaction shows a really large and negative delta G for the exergonic reaction of ATP hydrolysis. All of this energy that's released is used to drive this other reaction over here and overcome this activation energy. This reaction that's right here is the phosphorylation of glucose to glucose 6-phosphate. So these reactions are coupled together in order to drive this final reaction right here. Glucose plus ATP, this phosphate is transferred to glucose to get glucose 6-phosphate plus ADP. This is actually the first chemical reaction of cell respiration. The phosphates from ATP can be used for mechanical or transport work. Because of the negative charge on phosphates, using the phosphate of ATP to phosphorylate other molecules is a great way to change the shape of target molecules and activate or deactivate a molecule through shape change. You can see in this example the shape changes of myosin and the shape change of a protein pump. Remember, this process of ATP donating phosphates to other molecules is called phosphorylation. Phosphorylation is the transfer of phosphates from one molecule to another and is usually done by a kinase enzyme. Remember, the reason why phosphorylation causes a shape change is rooted in biochemistry, because the phosphate adds a patch of negative charge, and what happens is that new negative charge patch attracts any nearby positive charged R groups, and that new negative patch repels any nearby negative charge R groups. We've seen examples of ATP in use so many times. Phosphorylation in RTK pathways creates docking sites on these receptors for relay molecules. Phosphates can change the shape of protein pumps and activate enzymes, just like what's happening on here. Phosphorylation in this spot right here opens up this green regulatory region of the enzyme and exposes the active site on this yellow catalytic region of the enzyme. In other words, phosphorylation has activated this enzyme by a shape change. Finally, phosphorylation can be used in a process that destroys proteins after the proteins have served their purpose. We'll talk about that more later in the course. And just when you thought ATP couldn't get any better, one really cool thing about ATP is that ATP is reusable. ATP is constantly being used up and recharged. ATP isn't a molecule that moves around in the blood. ATP stays inside of the cells where it's going to be used. The reason why is because ATP can't be stored because its biochemical nature and its usefulness makes it very unstable. The terminal phosphate, the third phosphate, can sometimes kind of falsely come off and be transferred to other molecules or just be lost in general. So in cells, when ATP is used to release energy to do things or as a source of phosphates, ATP is converted to ADP plus free phosphate. But then ADP and free phosphate can be rejoined together to make ATP. Then that ATP can be used, resulting in ADP plus P, which can be converted back to ATP, which can be used again, and so on. So this cycle right here is called the ATP-ADP cycle. And the main process that converts ADP plus P to ATP is this catabolic process of cellular respiration, the subject of our next several videos. So let's recap. ATP is a molecule. It's not energy. It's a molecule that stores energy because of the bonds between its negatively charged phosphates. The energy from ATP can be used to do chemical work, and that's called coupling. Phosphates from ATP can be used to do mechanical work, transport work, and activate proteins by phosphorylation. ADP plus P, the end products of using up ATP, can be recycled back to ATP by cellular respiration. I hope this video was helpful in clearing out some myths about ATP.